Hi everybody and welcome to the final Collaborate in your series of Collaborate presentations. This is for A3 for EDU70007 English in the primary school. Let's get into it. It's our folio part B. We do our acknowledgement of country where we respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation who are the traditional owners of the land in which Swinburne Australian campuses are located in Melbourne's east and outer east. And we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Just to give you some key details, this is your final assessment for this subject. Yay, you've got 2,000 words plus give or take 10%. It is worth 40% and it is due the Monday of week 12, which should be the Monday of week 8 because this is a new quarter. Apologies, I will fix that. The assignment overview, we are having a look at the purpose and the unit connection. So some things that I just want to draw your attention to while having a look at this slide is that we are really drawing upon all of the things that we've learned in the unit thus far, and apologies again, that should say to week 8. So for the whole unit, everything that you've learnt thus far is going to prepare you to be able to do this unit plan. So our unit plan is going to be a series of lessons sequentially over 4 weeks, 4 lessons a week, making a total of 16 lessons. It is a unit plan and not a lesson plan, so it's not an in-depth detailed lesson. It's just an overview of what would be happening in that lesson, focusing on primarily obviously the teaching of English, and we're going to connect that to the Australian curriculum. We're going to talk about pedagogical approaches you can use and how we need to focus on English specifically, and as well as being able to generate lessons connecting obviously the curriculum to the pedagogy and then to the appropriate use of ICT. There are a series of components that make up this planner. So because it is worth 60% of our overall grade, it is quite in-depth and it has a series of parts to it. It's a bit difficult to explain in a 20-minute video all of the intricacies of each part. This is really just an overview for you to maybe get starting to think about ideas, get your maybe your focus, choose your strand, choose your year level, just get some things organized and prepared so that when you do come and have your live collaborate with myself, you have an idea of where you want to start, and then we can start brainstorming some ideas together in that live collaborate. So we've got 1,250 words. What do we need to do? Well, we're going to have a series of 4 weeks where there will be 4 lessons per week, giving you a total of 16 lessons. We are focusing on 1 year level, and you get to choose from what we would consider the middle to upper school. So we're focusing on years 3, 4, 5 or 6. You can choose any of those. Choose one specific year level that you are going to focus on. So that's an early decision that you can start making. Maybe it's something that you've had a little bit of experience in, whether it be through your own children or a placement, or maybe if you've worked as an aide in a classroom, you might have experience that way, or you can just go for something totally different and make it a whole different new learning curve for yourself. As a part of the Australian curriculum, it is broken up into the strands of language, literacy and literature. Underneath each of those are a series of sub-strands which look at then go into specific content descriptors which we use ourselves to teach English. You're going to choose one of the strands to focus on, and from there you are going to choose one of the content descriptors. Now you might be asking, well, what's the difference between language, literacy and literature? Well, I'm just going to stop my presentation for a moment so we can have a look. I highly suggest you going to the Australian Curriculum website and browsing through Australian Curriculum, click on Curriculum and click on English. That will bring you to this main page. We are still using version 8.4, even though version 9 has literally just been released. You can still use version 8.4. And have a look at how English works, and it brings you to this concept of structure, which I'm going to click read more. Underneath that gives you quite a detailed overview on each of the strands, substrands, and in particular content descriptors. So when we decipher the difference between these strands, we're looking at language being the mechanics of language, language and variation, how you use language in terms of social interaction, and how language can be different for different purposes. So we write to particular language styles. Kids begin to understand that the language we use in different social settings are different different to when we write a text, our language changes. When we're writing a fiction, fantasy novel, our language is going to be in a particular style compared to if we're writing a recipe or if we're writing an information report. So we learn that language is different. It changes for different contexts and styles and purposes, and we use figurative language in different ways to show expression. And kids get to see that, not all language is the same all the time, and we have different times when we use it. Under the language strand, we also have looking at the idea of audience and looking at the idea of structures of different types of text. As I just mentioned before, we would come to know that when we look at an information report, it has a particular audience. When we look at a persuasive text, we can say, who is the audience? Identifying audience is really important in terms of identifying the audience for when you're reading, to be able to identify who is the audience for this particular novel, but also identifying the audience in your own writing. We're looking for things like text cohesion, punctuation, concepts about print if you're in the junior school, and what I would call the real nuts and bolts, the sort of mechanics of writing. So we're thinking of things like sentence structure and grammar, word level grammar, vocab, spelling, as well as early phonics, which we are not focusing on early years, but that's also under that language strand. If we have a look at the middle, we're looking at literature, and literature is very much, as you can imagine, really focusing on text. Really focusing on the fact that, many different literature is constructed in different ways. We understand that text can have a cultural and social and lots of different implications to how the author has written this particular piece of literature. We really, as teachers, want to be able to select rich texts that have lots of these different features, because kids are going to be, as you can see with this substrand here called responding to literature, they're really going to be adding their personal comments, thinking about characters, thinking about viewpoints, thinking about, ideas, expressing preferences, evaluating text, examining text, looking at devices, literacy devices, language devices, and really it's a lot of analysis of rich text, and that's what you're going to spend a lot of your time doing as a part of the middle and upper school. And there's also a part here which would be creating. So whenever you see the word creating, you know that you're going to be doing some writing as opposed to just reading and analysing other texts, creating literary texts, and experimentation and adaptation. Over with literacy, we're looking at texts in context. So how are they used? How we interact with others. Very much some speaking and listening facets to literacy as a strand. We would also be interpreting, analysing and evaluating. Again, looking at purpose and audience, looking at comprehension, looking at analysing text, and also that element of creating text where you'll be editing and writing using software. That's a very brief overview, and it's not really possible to understand all the intricacies of each of those substrands just from having a look at those. But what you can do is click on strands and say, for example, you might want to do something that involves, say, literature. You might decide that that will be your focus. So you can deselect the other two, and you can click on a particular year level. I might click on grade 5. I've still got my strand in there, and I'm going to say submit. That will just bring up, I hope, yep, here it comes, just the unit descriptors. Here we go. Just the content descriptors for grade 5 literature. So it narrows it down for you, and there are also some work samples if you want to have a look through to get some ideas about what could be achievable in the literature strand for grade 5. So let's click on it, and you'll see here that we have each individual content descriptor. We are asking you to focus on one content descriptor to add to your lesson planner. Sometimes the content descriptors can be a little bit difficult to understand. They are quite jargony, and we have to make sure that we are interpreting them the right way. So if we have a look at, say, present a point of view about a particular literacy text or literary text using appropriate meta-language and reflecting on the viewpoints of others, you can click on elaborations and it brings up further explanation. Now this one's only got one further dot point. Some of them, like I can click on this one, they might have 2 or 3 further dot points. This one's given you 2 further dot points that help you to understand the content descriptor better. So under the elaboration, it's got posing and discussing questions such as, should the character have behaved as they did, and beginning to make balanced judgments about the dilemmas characters face and relative merit and harm. So it gives you a little bit of guidance. Rather than just asking kids, what's your point of view? What do you think of this? It gives you some guidance as to what form of questioning they want you to use. They actually want you to look at dilemmas that characters face, and that's going to give you guidance on what kind of questions you could ask maybe during something like a literacy circle or a reciprocal reading group. So once you've got, let's get back to our presentation. Once you've got an idea on what you would like to do, I always recommend that you start with the curriculum first and then you work from there. Sometimes when students are asked to make unit planners, they get very excited, and it's wonderful to see because they'll be like, oh, I really want to use this video, I really want to use this book, I really love that book, by Andy Griffiths. I really want to put that in my unit. It's really hard if you choose resources first and then try and find a content descriptor to match it. My advice is choose a content descriptor first. Find something in the curriculum that you think would be fun to teach. And then you can think about which videos match, what books would be good, then you can choose your resources. Don't try and have a resource and then try and think of how you're going to make it work with your content descriptor, because it's always harder that way. So I'll put my unit title here. I'll put maybe grade 5. I'm doing the literature strand, and I'll put in my content descriptors. If you want to put in more than one content descriptor, that's fine. Just remember that whatever you put there needs to be applicable to what you're teaching in the 16 lessons. So if you put 5 content descriptors, you should be teaching the elements of those 5 content descriptors within your unit. We should see evidence of it. So if you're thinking, oh, that's too much, I can't cover all that, then maybe keep it basic, maybe keep it to 1 or 2. You've got learning objectives here, and this I should actually say that this can be downloaded from our Padlet. There is no need to use this particular template. You don't have to use it, but you know what? It's there, it's ready, it has everything in it. If you just followed the steps of filling it in, you would know that you've covered everything. So for me, I would probably use it because then I just know that everything's there. There's no point reinventing the wheel. But if you really have a different unit planner that you're more happy to use, or you want to change some headings around or whatever, there's no one set way to present it as long as you've done all the facets that you need to. So this can be found in our Padlet, and you can go about filling it in. Your learning objectives really need to be based in what the kids need to know. So they are like your overall learning intentions. What are the kids going to be able to do by the end of the unit? And we'll have more practice of like formulating these objectives, because they really do need to be quite skills based and quite explicit. We talk about them as being something that you would communicate with to the kids with. If they're grade 5s, you should be sitting them down and talking to them about what the lesson objectives are, what the objectives of the unit are, because they need to take ownership over their own learning and to ensure that they are able to meet those skills too. So we'll practice writing some of those in our live collab. We'll have a unit overview, which gives a bit of an overview as to the whole rationale of the unit itself. We then after that have our series of 16 lessons. Now, as you can imagine, they're not full lesson plans that are highly detailed and talk about all the questions that the teacher is going to ask and all of the things that you can imagine if it was an individual lesson. Now, 16 lessons is quite a number of lessons. So you won't have the word count to be terribly detailed in what is happening in each of the lessons, but you will be able to maybe state the focus of that lesson, what you want the kids to do, and what the task is for that lesson. Perhaps if there's a small group, what they're doing. If there's some form of perhaps differentiation, you can state that in there too. Now, my advice here as well is that we really want to make sure that the lessons align and they make sense with each other. So what do I mean by that? So if my unit of work is going to be based in reading, and let's go back to that content descriptor I found a minute ago. It was talking about kids analysing text and talking about characters, points of views, and dilemmas that characters face, and really getting kids to justify what their opinion is. So if that's my focus for my unit, I want to maintain that focus throughout the whole unit. So I don't want to have kids looking at point of view in lessons 1 to 7, and then the focus changes to visualizing and comprehension, and then the focus changes from lesson 13 to lesson 16. Now they're going to be writing persuasions or persuasive texts. So we don't want the focus to become jumbled. We don't want it to jump around to a whole lot of different things. We don't want to have spelling lessons mixed with writing lessons, mixed with handwriting lessons, mixed with comprehension, mixed with reading. So if you're going to be talking about writing narratives, you have 16 weeks to develop that focus. You can ask the kids to plan. You can ask the kids to get feedback. Maybe they go back and do some more writing. Maybe they work on their complication. Maybe they get feedback from others. Then they go back and have another go. So over the 16 lessons, they're working on their narratives. Don't jump around. Don't make them do persuasions and information reports and narratives and lots of different things. Just really choose a quite explicit focus. Because if we're in the real classroom, you need to give kids time to develop the skills. We don't want to just show them something once or twice and then tick it off and say we've done it. I was going to say one more thing, but I've forgotten. All right, so we'll talk more about the series of lessons and how they can connect to each other, again, in their interactive collab. Something else that you'll need to also think about, which is why it's a good idea to use a template, because you won't forget to put things in, is thinking about what your assessment could be. Your assessment needs to be something that's going to happen beforehand to establish prior knowledge, something that's going to help you gather information. I just gave you a clue because I said if you were doing a narrative over a series of 16 lessons, you'd get student feedback from each other. You'd get peer-to-peer feedback. You would give the kids feedback on their writing partway through your writing unit. You wouldn't just wait to the lesson 16 for them to hand you a piece of writing to find out that they haven't done a good job and they've missed all the learning intentions. So assessment's really important. Assessment needs to align with what your focus is. If your whole unit is based on writing a narrative, your assessment should be analysing and assessing writing narratives. That could be through a rubric, that could be through a discussion, but it has to be something. So if my series of lessons is about narrative writing, I wouldn't look down here and see running records. That doesn't align with the unit focus. So these are the things that Lindsay will be looking for when he comes to mark this assessment. Does your assessment align with the lesson focus? If it's a reading unit, we should be seeing reading assessments. If it's a writing unit, we should be seeing writing assessments, and assessments that reflect your lessons. Down here we have your resources, and you're going to share with us what your resources are. Books, videos, songs, whatever you're using. All right, as well as thinking about the actual template and lessons itself, there's some things that you really need to get ready. You need to think how you're going to make sure that your model aligns with some sort of English-based pedagogy. And the ones that we focus primarily on in our unit is the whole language model, skills model, or 4 resources model. What's nice about the 4 resources model is that it encompasses elements of kids being text decoders, so you're really getting that bottom-up skills model anyway through there. You're getting them to be participants and users of text, which encompasses things like whole language and transactional model, and then getting them to be critical, which could be quite good because this is going to be an upper school / middle school unit. So getting them to get that critical thinking. Does it mean that if you're using whole language, you can't think critically? Of course not, but you'll just have elements of whole language spread throughout your model. You don't need to tell us specifically how each lesson is going to be structured, because I don't know if you're going to have the words for that, but you can show us elements of your model. So when I think about whole language, we're thinking about really embracing the whole text. So we would want to see tuning ins where the teacher is embracing the whole text, going, tuning the kids into the story, making predictions, looking at titles. If we're reading a persuasive text about sharks, like why is it formatted like that? We want to really embrace the whole text and getting the kids ready to learn. So we should see elements of your particular model embraced through your lessons, because you are going to have to write a justification in 250 words. So you need to explain how this particular model has been used in your unit and why it is effective. You could also use things like gradual release, explicit teaching, modeling, things like that. But it would be good to use an English-specific one as well. You can still tie it to these extra things as you're making your justification, but make sure you keep it as English pedagogy as well. Again, we'll speak more about that in the live, but it's something to think about before you start planning your lessons. You're going to have a section called resources, and that's going to be 250 words, and they're just talking about which modes of communication are supported. How do these support the learning outcomes? And really what the crux of this is we don't want to have, say the lesson starts off and there's a song, a YouTube clip with a song. And if you have decided to use that song, if you have decided to use that video, if you've decided to use a visual image, a scaffold, a chart, whatever it is that you've decided to use, there should be value in it. It should be adding to the lesson, and the kids should be getting more out of the lesson because you have chosen it. So you need to be able to justify, why are your resources in there? How are they enhancing the lesson? How are they enhancing the learning? So if you've chosen to have a video that talks about how to write a narrative text, you talk about why that particular one was chosen. You've got 250 words to do that. You've also got 250 words to talk about assessment. You're going to talk about what assessment strategies you've used. Now, you've already listed them. You'll remember if we think back to the lesson overview, the template, that we listed some assessment strategies, but we didn't have time in the actual template itself to go into a lot of detail. So you're going to save that for this part of the assessment. And these 2, 3, and 4 are outside of obviously that template. So the template is going to be what makes up what we're calling part 1. And you'll hand in your template with your 16 lesson overview. And then you'll have your 2, 3, and 4 as a document afterwards. It's all submitted as one document, but they're following on from there. So what assessment strategies did you choose? You're going to justify them. You're going to talk about the benefits and limitations of using the particular assessment. As you can see here, we've got an example of a reading fluency rubric. So if I was doing an assessment if I was doing a unit of work on persuasive writing, I wouldn't be choosing a reading fluency rubric. We want to make sure that your assessment aligns. If you are doing a unit of work on reading fluency, then by all means choose a reading fluency rubric, but you have to justify why you've chosen, like what was it about this particular rubric? From all the rubrics in the world, there's many. Yep, sorry, I just got cut off from my recording. So have a think about your assessment strategies and how they can align. If you're not sure if your assessment is aligning or what the best choice is, or if you're having trouble finding an assessment that matches, then please email us and ask us the question, and we're more than happy to help out with that. Number 5 is your references. Obviously, they're not included in the word count. They just need to be added to your assessment at the very, very end. So you'll have your template or your lesson plan template. You'll have your resources and your assessment and your components of the 2, 3, and 4, and then you'll have your references after that. So again, just to reiterate, after your template has been filled in, you'll have 750 words, 250 words each. First, you're going to connect to your pedagogical approaches and justify, what you've used and why you've chosen to incorporate, why you think your approach is the best approach to meet the kids' needs. If you've chosen the whole language model, why do you think that would be the best approach to teaching your reading focus? If you've chosen full resources model, why was that the best approach to teaching persuasive writing? So you're going to justify and explain your approach and why it's effective in that situation. You've got your resources and you've got your assessment. So criteria 1 is understanding of the practice of planning, teaching, and assessing in primary English. So how well do these pieces fit together? So it's really about you being able to justify and explain all of the different pieces. You've got your planning. You're showing us that you're able to plan a series of lessons and that your teaching and assessments fit together. the reason why we're asking do all these pieces fit together, because you're thinking about the practical, what you're doing in the classroom in your series of 16 lessons. Does it match with your pedagogy? Does it make sense? Does it align? Have you justified your choice and you've used evidence from the unit and further reading to justify that that was a great idea, and that you're able to assess, and you're able to assess English tasks with an appropriate assessment tool that's varied and happening before, during, and after learning. Criteria 2 is your capacity to evaluate and justify your strategies, resources, and tools designed for English. So it's really about you having the theoretical knowledge and the, pedagogical concepts really nailed down, so that you're able to say, what happens in my classroom is not just off the cuff sort of, oh, I thought that was fun, or I chose that because it was, something interesting. You have to have a theoretical underpinning to what you do in the classroom. So you're able to justify your choices based on that conceptual knowledge of those practices and those pedagogy. Criteria 3 is understanding the theories and models underpinning English in the primary classroom. So how well have you demonstrated your application of the model? So we should be able to see that model in your unit, in your lessons. You can't just say in your pedagogical approaches section that you've used whole language, and then we go back and check your 16 lessons and we can't see any evidence of whole language. So you need to make sure that you use it, or we can see evidence of it or traces of it throughout your 16 lessons. Now, yes, the 16 lessons are just an overview, but we should be able to see elements of your model still used in there. How well have you justified this model in your justification, which we've talked about? Criteria 4 is your academic writing, and I'm sure that you're all pretty much across this, being postgraduate students, but just remember that you have to always think about your academic writing, show your in-text citations, your reference lists. Now remember, in the actual lessons itself, I don't imagine there being a great deal of academic references. They will be for the other sections. Final tips, just make sure that you go back to the Padlet, and there are lots of examples that have been gathered last time, and I've left them in there because they're great examples of little bits and pieces of different people's folios, which can help you to get an idea of what somebody maybe wrote for their assessment piece, or maybe what somebody wrote for their pedagogical approach, or how they started planning their units. So there's lots of great tips in that Padlet. Just remember, it should be fun. Choose something that's interesting to you, but just remember, start off with the content descriptor first, and then you can choose your fun resources and fun things from there. We're going to work backwards. So thinking about learning outcomes, as we just said, what should the students be able to understand? It's really important that you think about that first. Then you think about your assessment that could align. I think activities and assessment will probably sort of go hand in hand, because you should be thinking about, I call them touch points, but what I mean by that is you're sort of checking in with students at multiple times throughout the unit. Like we said before, we don't want to be getting to lesson 16. If it was a real, which we soon will be in your case, you're really in the classroom. We don't want to wait till lesson 16 to find out that these 5 kids didn't get it, or they didn't know what to do, or they were lost, or it was too hard for them, or we didn't have a chance to change up our practice. So we want to have different touch points throughout the whole unit planner. Now, assessment doesn't have to always be super complex. Some of the formative assessment might be that you're just checking in with particular students. You're getting kids to hold up whiteboards. You're getting them to hand in samples for an analysis that you'll use with a rubric. Maybe if you're doing a narrative unit, you get them to hand in their orientation to you before they can, and they have to get feedback on it before they're allowed to write anymore. So you give just little touch points with them so that you're getting feedback to the students throughout the series of lessons. Break down the whole down to identify the parts. These parts can be taught in a sequence of 16 lessons. As we said before, it is quite a number of things to go through. I'll be looking back through my files and I'll try and get some examples of units I've done so I can show you how they might look in a sequence of lessons to give you some ideas. We'll talk a bit about pedagogy and how you can incorporate that in there too. But start off by thinking about your grade level, your strand, and maybe choose a content descriptor that you're really interested in. And I'll see you in the interactive collab.